Welcome to this journey into the forgotten corners of American history, where documented events blur into legend and the truth remains buried beneath decades of silence. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from, and what time is it right now? Are you alone? There's something uniquely unsettling about sharing these stories across time and distance, knowing that somewhere in the dark corners of Louisiana, the places we're about to discuss still exist, still wait, still remember. Tonight we examine a case that official records tried desperately to erase. A case so disturbing that by 1905, local authorities in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, had sealed all documents related to it, marking the file with a single word: forbidden. The year was 1902. The location: a nameless stretch of coastal wetlands in southern Louisiana, where the Gulf of Mexico bleeds into a labyrinth of bayous, marshes, and forgotten islands. Among these islands, there existed one known only by its French Creole name, Île Perdue, the Lost Island. It was here in February of that year that the Coleman family, Samuel, age 45, his wife Martha, 38, and their 4 children, Elizabeth, 16, Thomas, 14, Mary, 11, and little James, just 7 years old, arrived with hopes of building a new life far from the industrial chaos consuming America's cities. Samuel Coleman was an educated man, a former schoolteacher from Baton Rouge, who had inherited a modest sum and decided to invest it in land, isolation, and self-sufficiency. The island property cost him almost nothing. The previous owner, an elderly Creole fisherman, had practically given it away, asking only that Samuel respect what was already there. Samuel dismissed this as superstitious nonsense. By August of that same year, all 6 members of the Coleman family had vanished without a trace. What authorities discovered on Île Perdue would lead to one of the most heavily suppressed investigations in Louisiana history. What we've uncovered through archived letters, sealed testimonies, and interviews conducted decades later suggests something far more disturbing than a simple disappearance. This is the forbidden case of the Coleman family. This is the story of the rituals on the Lost Island, and I must warn you now, what you're about to hear challenges the boundaries of what we accept as possible, as real, as documentable fact. Some of you will dismiss it as folklore. Others will recognize, in these events, the fingerprints of something ancient, something that never truly left these lands, something that waits still in the places we've forgotten to remember. The investigation officially lasted 3 months. Unofficially, it never ended. People are still looking, people are still finding things on that island, and every discovery only deepens the mystery, raises more questions, suggests more terrible possibilities. Before we go further, I need you to understand the context, the world, into which the Colemans stepped when they arrived on Île Perdue. Because this wasn't just an island, it was a threshold, a place where multiple worlds, multiple beliefs, multiple powers converged and clashed in ways that defy our modern understanding. So let me take you back to the Louisiana coast at the turn of the 20th century, back to a time when the wilderness was still genuinely wild, when isolation meant true solitude, when the old ways, the very old ways, still held power in places the modern world hadn't yet reached. Back to 1902, back to Île Perdue, back to the moment when the Coleman family's dream of a new beginning became something else entirely. Something they couldn't escape, something that might still be happening even now, in that forgotten place where the water meets the land and the old gods never truly died. To understand what happened to the Coleman family, we must first understand the Louisiana they entered in 1902. This was a Louisiana still reeling from Reconstruction, still finding its identity in the aftermath of the Civil War. But more importantly, this was a Louisiana where cultures collided and blended in ways found nowhere else in America. French, Spanish, African, Caribbean, and Native American traditions had been mixing for nearly 200 years, creating a unique spiritual landscape that acknowledged powers the rest of the country had long forgotten or dismissed. The coastal regions, particularly the maze of islands and bayous south of New Iberia, remained largely untouched by modern development. Families lived as they had for generations, fishing, trapping, farming small plots of high ground, speaking French Creole more often than English, practicing a Catholicism that incorporated far older beliefs. The Chitimacha people had lived in these wetlands for thousands of years before European contact. Though decimated by disease and displacement, their descendants remained, their knowledge of the land deeper and older than any written record. They knew which islands were safe. They knew which places should never be disturbed. They knew the stories that explained why certain locations remained perpetually abandoned, even when land was scarce and valuable. Île Perdue was one such place. The island sat approximately 12 miles south of Franklin, Louisiana, accessible only by boat through a treacherous network of narrow channels that shifted with every storm. It measured roughly 300 acres, mostly marsh and cypress swamp, with perhaps 20 acres of elevated ground near its center. On this high ground stood an old house, built in French colonial style, abandoned for at least 2 decades when Samuel Coleman purchased the property. Why had it been abandoned? The land agent who handled the sale couldn't say or wouldn't. Records from the St. Mary Parish Courthouse show the property changing hands 7 times between 1881 and 1901, but no evidence exists that anyone ever lived there during those 20 years. People bought it, paid taxes for a year or two, then sold it again at a loss. Samuel Coleman saw opportunity where others saw only peculiarity. In letters to his brother in Baton Rouge, he described the island as paradise untouched, praising its isolation, its abundance of fish and game, its fertile soil. He spoke of teaching his children self-reliance, of building something lasting, of escaping the spiritual decay he perceived in urban life. Martha Coleman's letters, however, told a different story from the beginning. In a letter dated March 15, 1902, just 6 weeks after the family's arrival, Martha wrote to her sister in New Orleans, "The house is larger than we expected, but so very old. The children hear sounds at night they say are rats, but I've found no evidence of such. Samuel insists we're simply adjusting to country life, but there's something about this place that feels occupied, even when we're alone." By April, the tone had shifted further. Martha described finding strange objects buried in the yard, small cloth bundles containing hair, fingernail clippings, and what appeared to be chicken bones arranged in specific patterns. Samuel had laughed it off as Negro superstition, remnants from previous occupants, nothing to concern civilized people. But Martha had shown these bundles to a Creole woman in Franklin during their monthly supply trip. The woman's reaction had been immediate and severe. She'd refused to touch them, made the sign of the cross, and warned Martha in broken English to leave that place before the moon is full again. The children adapted as children do, finding adventure where their parents found unease. Elizabeth kept a diary, fragments of which would later be recovered. Her early entries spoke of exploring the island, discovering a small cemetery hidden deep in the cypress grove, its markers so weathered that no names remained legible. Thomas wrote about finding carved symbols on trees throughout the property, circles within circles, crude human figures, patterns that seemed to point toward the island's center. Young Mary reported seeing lights in the marsh at night, floating orbs that moved with apparent intelligence, approaching the house and then retreating. Samuel explained them as swamp gas, a natural phenomenon, but Mary insisted these lights responded to her presence, that they seemed curious about her. 7-year-old James, the youngest, spoke frequently of the other children who played with him in the woods. His parents dismissed this as an imaginary friend, common for a lonely child adjusting to isolation. But James could describe these children in consistent detail. 3 of them, none of whom spoke English, who showed him secret paths through the swamp and taught him games that involved drawing symbols in the dirt. The Coleman's nearest neighbors, if they could be called that, were the Thibodeau family, Creole fishermen, who lived on a larger island about 4 miles west. Pierre Thibodeau later testified to investigators that he had warned Samuel about Île Perdue during their first meeting in March. According to Thibodeau's statement, given to Sheriff John Beaumont in September 1902, "I tell him that island, she's not for living. I tell him the old people, they know stories. Bad things happened there long time ago. Before the Spanish, before the French even. The Chitimacha, they used that island for, I don't know the English word, sacred things. Death, things. I tell him this, but he just smile and say, 'I don't believe in ghosts, Mr. Thibodeau.' I tell him, it's not ghosts you should worry about. It's what's still alive there." By May, Martha's letters had stopped arriving regularly. Her sister in New Orleans received only 2 letters that month, both brief and oddly formal, lacking Martha's usual warmth and detail. The final letter, dated May 28th, contained only 3 sentences. "We are well. The children are learning much about the natural world. Samuel has found something remarkable, but he insists we tell no one until he understands it completely." What had Samuel found? This question would haunt investigators for years. June and July passed with no correspondence from the island at all. Martha's sister sent 3 letters, receiving no response. Samuel's brother sent 2, also ignored. In early August, Martha's sister contacted the sheriff's office in Franklin, expressing concern. On August 12, 1902, Sheriff Beaumont and Deputy Marcus LeBlanc made the journey to Île Perdue. What they found there would begin the official investigation into one of Louisiana's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. But more than that, it would reveal that the Coleman family had stumbled upon something that had been waiting on that island for a very long time, something that multiple cultures had tried to contain, to appease, or to forget, something that the Colemans, in their modern confidence, had awakened. Sheriff John Beaumont kept a detailed journal throughout his law enforcement career. His entry for August 12, 1902, remains one of the most chilling pieces of primary source documentation in Louisiana criminal history. The original journal is sealed in the Louisiana State Archives, but a typed transcript was leaked in 1976. It reads, "Arrived Île Perdue approximately 2:30 p.m. after difficult navigation through the channels. The house was visible from a distance, appearing intact with no obvious signs of damage or disturbance." Deputy LeBlanc commented that the place felt too quiet. No bird sounds, despite the time of day when birds should be most active. As we approached the main house, we observed the front door standing open. Called out multiple times, no response. Entered the property with weapons drawn. The interior scene was deeply troubling. The dining table was set for a meal, 6 places, food still on the plates but long since rotted and covered in mold. The decay suggested the food had been sitting for weeks, possibly a month or more. Flies everywhere. The smell was considerable. What disturbed me most, the chairs were pushed back as though the family had stood up suddenly, mid-meal. But nothing appeared knocked over or disturbed. No signs of struggle. It appeared they simply stood up, walked out, and never returned. The children's beds were made. Personal belongings remained in place. Martha Coleman's jewelry box, still containing valuables. Samuel's pocket watch on his bedside. Table. The children's toys arranged neatly in their rooms. If the family had left, they took nothing with them. Sheriff Beaumont and Deputy LeBlanc searched the property for hours, finding no trace of the family, no indication of where they might have gone. But they found other things, strange things, things that transformed a missing persons case into something far more complex. In Samuel Coleman's study, they discovered his journal lying open on his desk. The final entry, dated July 30th, 1902, read, "I have spent 3 nights now in the grove watching. Martha begs me to stop, says I'm frightening the children with my obsession. But how can I stop when I've witnessed something that rewrites everything we think we know? They gather when the moon is dark. Not ghosts, not spirits, actual people, living people, performing rituals I recognize from no religious tradition I've studied. Where do they come from? How do they reach this island? I've watched the channels. No boats arrive. Yet there they are, dozens of them, appearing in the grove as if they'd always been there. Tonight I will document everything. I will bring my camera. Science must record what superstition has only whispered about." There was no entry after this. The journal simply stopped. Sheriff Beaumont seized the journal as evidence. He also collected what he called occult paraphernalia found throughout the house. Bundles of herbs tied with red cord, small cloth bags containing unknown substances, drawings of symbols he didn't recognize pinned to the walls of the children's rooms. But the most disturbing discovery came when they searched the grove Samuel had mentioned in his journal. In the center of the island, approximately half a mile from the house, the cypress trees grew in an almost perfect circular formation, creating a natural clearing about 40 feet in diameter. The ground there was oddly bare. No undergrowth, no fallen leaves, just hard-packed earth that looked as though it had been swept. Clean. Deputy LeBlanc's official statement, given August 13, 1902, described what they found. In the very center of this clearing stood a wooden post, about 6 feet tall, driven deep into the ground. Surrounding this post in a circular pattern were 6 smaller posts, each bearing a piece of cloth tied to its top. The cloth pieces were different colors: red, white, black, yellow, green, and purple. At the base of the central post, we found a wooden box, roughly 1 foot square, partially buried. Sheriff Beaumont insisted we dig it up. Inside the box we found 6 locks of hair, bound with string and labeled with names: Samuel, Martha, Elizabeth, Thomas, Mary, and James Coleman. 6 fingernail clippings, similarly labeled. 6 small photographs of the family members, each photograph burned around the edges. And at the bottom, a journal, handwritten in a language neither of us could read. This journal, later identified as written in a mixture of Louisiana Creole French, Spanish, and what linguists believe was Chitimacha language, would take investigators months to partially translate. What they discovered in its pages suggested something extraordinary and terrifying. The journal appeared to be a record-keeping book for rituals performed on Île Perdue dating back to 1789. Generation after generation of practitioners had maintained this record, documenting ceremonies performed on specific dates according to lunar cycles. The purposes varied: healing, protection, communication with ancestors, and something the translators rendered as maintaining the boundary. The final entries in this journal were made in late July 1902. In what investigators could translate, they found references to the teacher and his family, to the willing participants, and most disturbingly, to the culmination of the cycle, the debt paid, the boundary renewed. Had the Colemans discovered the grove and the rituals being performed there? Had they been victims of these practitioners, or had they, somehow, become participants themselves? Sheriff Beaumont expanded the search. He interviewed Pierre Thibodeau extensively, learning more about the island's dark reputation. Thibodeau revealed that local Creole and Chitimacha communities had long known about les cérémonies performed on Île Perdue. These weren't evil practices, Thibodeau insisted, but necessary ones, rituals that maintained a balance, that kept something contained. The island, Thibodeau explained in his statement, she sits on a place where the world is thin, you understand, where what's buried can rise, where what's dead doesn't stay quiet. The ceremonies, they keep it sleeping, they keep it satisfied. Every generation, someone has to do this. Usually the old families, they know, they remember, they take turns with the burden. But what if those old families had died out, moved away, forgotten? What if the rituals had been interrupted? And what if the Colemans, in their ignorance, had stumbled into the middle of a desperate attempt to restore what had been lost? Sheriff Beaumont brought in Father Michel Broussard, the Catholic priest from Franklin, to examine the site and the materials they'd collected. Father Broussard's written assessment, submitted August 20th, 1902, concluded, "These practices represent a syncretic tradition combining elements of African diaspora religions, Native American shamanism, and corrupted Catholic ritual. While I cannot condone these activities, I must acknowledge that the practitioners clearly believe they serve a protective function. Whether this belief has any basis in reality is beyond my authority to judge. What concerns me most is the evidence suggesting the Coleman family did not flee from these practices, but may have been absorbed into them, willingly or otherwise. Tell us in the comments what you think is happening so far. Do you believe the Colemans were victims? Or do you think they discovered something so compelling, so profound, that they chose to participate? Keep that thought in mind as we continue, because what investigators discovered next would suggest an even more disturbing possibility. The search continued through late August. Volunteers from Franklin and surrounding communities joined Sheriff Beaumont in scouring every inch of Île Perdue, searching for bodies, for clues, for any evidence of what had happened to the family. What they found instead were more questions and more horror. August 24th, 1902, a volunteer searcher named Robert Duchamp made a discovery that would transform the investigation entirely. While searching the northern section of the island, Duchamp noticed an unusual depression in the ground, roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter. The earth had recently been disturbed. He could tell from the different coloration of the soil and the lack of vegetation. Using a shovel, he began to dig. 3 feet down, his shovel struck wood. Within an hour, Sheriff Beaumont and several volunteers had excavated enough to reveal a wooden trapdoor, secured with a rusted iron lock. The wood appeared ancient, but the lock was relatively new, manufactured within the past decade, based on its design. They broke the lock. The trapdoor opened onto a crude earthen stairway, descending into darkness. Deputy LeBlanc volunteered to enter first, carrying a kerosene lantern. What he found beneath the earth of Île Perdue would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Sachidza underground chamber measured approximately 20 feet long by 12 feet wide, with a ceiling barely 6 feet high, low enough that men had to stoop as they moved through it. The walls and ceiling were reinforced with ancient cypress timbers that showed evidence of incredible age, yet remained structurally sound, preserved by the particular chemistry of the swamp water that had seeped into the space over centuries. The chamber appeared to be a ritual space, a hidden temple constructed long before American settlers arrived in Louisiana. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols, figures, scenes that seemed to tell a story. Dr. William Hartley, an anthropologist from Tulane University who examined the site 3 weeks later, estimated the carvings dated from the late 1600s or early 1700s, possibly created by enslaved Africans working on Spanish plantations, incorporating traditional African religious imagery with indigenous American symbols. But the carvings were not the most disturbing element of the chamber. Against the far wall, stood an altar, constructed of stone blocks that showed evidence of great age. On this altar sat 6 candles, recently burned, the wax still pliable. Surrounding the candles were personal items: a woman's hairbrush, a man's pipe, a child's toy soldier, a young girl's hair ribbon, a boy's pocket knife, and a small child's wooden horse. Items belonging to the Coleman family. Deputy LeBlanc's supplementary report, filed August 25th, described the rest. Behind the altar, driven into the earthen wall, were 6 iron stakes. From each stake hung a piece of clothing, a man's shirt, a woman's dress, and children's garments of varying sizes. Sheriff Beaumont identified these as matching descriptions of clothing the Coleman family wore, based on photographs provided by the family's relatives. But there was more. Along the southern wall of the chamber, arranged in a careful row, were 6 earthenware jars, each sealed with wax and marked with a symbol. Sheriff Beaumont ordered these jars opened and examined. 4 of the jars contained soil, just ordinary earth. But 2 of them, the largest jars, contained something else: fragments of bone, small enough to be human finger bones or those of children. Mixed with these bones were small personal items: buttons, a religious medal, scraps of fabric, and in one jar, a small metal locket containing 2 tiny photographs. The photographs showed 2 children, a boy and a girl, dressed in clothing. From the mid-19th century, on the back of one photograph, written in faded ink, Marie et Jean-Baptiste, 1844. Dr. Hartley, in his official assessment submitted September 15, 1902, wrote, "This chamber represents a ritual space used for what practitioners of Vodou and related traditions call ancestor work, ceremonies designed to honor, appease, or communicate with the dead. The presence of multiple generations of materials suggests continuous use over more than 150 years. The Coleman family's possessions in this space indicate they either placed these items here themselves, participating in rituals, or someone placed them there after the family's disappearance, incorporating them into an ongoing ceremonial practice. Either interpretation is deeply disturbing." Sheriff Beaumont sealed the underground chamber and posted guards to prevent further public access. But word had spread. Newspapers in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette began covering the story. Headlines screamed, "Family vanishes in voodoo ritual. Lost Island yields dark secrets. Modern family falls victim to ancient cult." The sensationalism obscured the more complex reality, but it also brought unwanted attention. By early September, curiosity seekers were attempting to reach Île Perdue. The parish authorities, concerned about both public safety and the integrity of the investigation, took the unprecedented step of declaring the island off-limits to all civilian access. But the investigation continued, and with each passing day, it revealed layers of complexity that challenged investigators' understanding of what had actually happened. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In early September, while conducting a final sweep of the Coleman house, Deputy LeBlanc discovered a loose floorboard in what had been Martha Coleman's bedroom. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was Martha's personal diary. Unlike her letters, which had been carefully composed and censored for her sister's consumption, this diary revealed Martha's true experience on Île Perdue. The entries began optimistically enough, mirroring the tone of her early letters, but by mid-March, less than 6 weeks after their arrival, the entries began to change. March 18, 1902. "I saw her again today, the old woman who watches from the tree line. Samuel says I'm imagining things, that isolation is affecting my mind. But I've seen her at least 5 times now. She never comes closer, never speaks, just stands at the edge of the cypress grove watching our house. She wears black, always black, with a red scarf wrapped around her head. Today, I waved to her. She didn't wave back, but she made a gesture with her hands. 3 fingers pointed at me, then at the ground. What did it mean? April 3rd, 1902. The children are having nightmares. All of them, every night. They describe the same dreams. People in white clothing, dancing in circles, singing in a language they don't understand. Elizabeth woke screaming about fire, about someone calling her name. Thomas says the dreams feel like memories, not dreams at all. Mary draws pictures of what she sees. I've hidden them from Samuel. The images are too disturbing. Symbols, faces, things I don't want her little mind to be conceiving. April 22nd, 1902. I've begun to understand. This morning I followed the path Thomas discovered, the one leading to the grove. I didn't go all the way. Something stopped me. Some instinct. That to proceed without invitation would be dangerous. But I saw the clearing, the posts, the patterns in the earth. This is a sacred place, not Christian sacred, but something older. I felt it. A presence, a power, a purpose that predates everything we've been taught to believe. May 1st, 1902. Last night I met her, the old woman. She came to the house after dark, knocked on the door 3 times. Samuel was asleep, exhausted from working the fields. I answered. She spoke to me in Creole French, which I understand better than I've let Samuel know. She told me her name is Marguerite Doucet. She is 87 years old. She is one of the last who remembers, who maintains, who performs the necessary work. The entry continued for 3 pages, detailing Martha's conversation with Marguerite. According to Martha's account, the old woman explained that Île Perdue sat atop an ancient burial site used by the Chitimacha people for over 1,000 years to inter their honored dead. When European colonizers arrived, enslaved Africans had recognized the spiritual significance of the site and had continued to use it, blending their traditions with the indigenous practices they found there. But the site's significance went deeper than burial. According to Marguerite, as relayed by Martha, the island existed as a thin place, a location where the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead was permeable. Certain rituals, performed at certain times, allowed communication and exchange between these realms. May 15th, 1902. Marguerite has been teaching me. She says the ceremonies are not optional. They must be performed, have been performed for generations. But the old families are dying out. Their children move to cities, forget the traditions, abandon the burden. She needs help. She's too old to do this alone much longer. When she saw we'd moved to the island, she knew. She says the island chose us, that we were called here, that Samuel didn't just happen to find this property. It found him. May 29th, 1902. I haven't told Samuel everything, how can I? He's a rational man, a teacher, a believer in science and progress. But I've attended 3 ceremonies now. I've witnessed things I cannot explain through his framework. I've felt presences that aren't alive but aren't dead either. I've heard voices that speak without sound. And most troubling, I've begun to understand why this work matters. What happens if it stops? What waits beneath this ground, held in place only by ritual, by memory, by the continued acknowledgement of powers we're supposed to have outgrown. June 18th, 1902. Samuel found my diary yesterday. I thought he'd be angry. Instead, he was curious. Tonight, I'm taking him to meet Marguerite. I'm bringing him to a ceremony. I think once he sees, once he experiences what I've experienced, he'll understand. We didn't come here by accident. We came here for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, that reason is bigger than our small dreams of self-sufficiency and simple living. The diary ended with an entry dated July 29th, 1902, the night before Samuel's final journal entry. Tomorrow night is the dark moon. Marguerite says it's time for the full ceremony, the one that happens once every generation. She says all of us must participate, even the children. Samuel has agreed. The children are excited. They think it's an adventure. I'm terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Whatever happens tomorrow night, we will never be the same. But Marguerite assures us we will be safe. She says the ritual protects those who perform it, that we are not victims but vessels, not sacrifices but shepherds. I choose to believe her. I choose to believe we've found our purpose. No further entries were made. The discovery of Martha's diary shifted the investigation dramatically. Sheriff Beaumont now had a name, Marguerite Doucette. If this woman existed, if she could be found, she might hold the answers to what happened to the Coleman family. The search for Marguerite Doucette consumed the entire month of September. Sheriff Beaumont interviewed dozens of people in the Creole and Chitimacha communities around Franklin, Jeanneret, and Baldwin. The name was known. Several elderly residents remembered a Marguerite Doucette, a healer woman who lived somewhere in the bayous, who people consulted for ailments that doctors couldn't cure, for problems that had spiritual rather than physical roots. But no one knew exactly where she lived. Or, rather, no one was willing to say. People were protecting her, Sheriff Beaumont wrote in his journal September 17th. I could see it in their faces. They knew where to find her, but they wouldn't tell us. Not out of malice, but out of respect or fear, or both. These weren't ignorant people refusing to cooperate with authorities. These were intelligent individuals making a calculated choice to protect someone they viewed as essential to their community. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Father Broussard. The priest had his own contacts in the Creole community, people who trusted him despite their engagement with non-Christian practices. Through these contacts, he arranged a meeting. On September 23, 1902, Sheriff Beaumont, Father Broussard, and Dr. Hartley traveled by boat to a location they were instructed not to disclose in any official record. There, in a small house built on stilts above the marsh, they met Marguerite Doucette. Dr. Hartley's account of this meeting, written privately but discovered among his papers after his death in 1941, provides our only detailed description of this encounter. She was ancient, far older than I'd expected. Her face held a map of years I couldn't begin to count, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. She invited us into her home, sparse, clean, filled with herbs hanging from the ceiling and jars containing substances I couldn't identify. She spoke in Creole French primarily, with Father Broussard translating, though I suspect her English was better than she let on. She showed no fear of Sheriff Beaumont, no concern about official consequences. She had, in her demeanor, the absolute confidence of someone who knew she was essential, that she could not be threatened or intimidated. When asked about the Coleman family, she was direct. Yes, she had met Martha Coleman. Yes, she had taught her about the ceremonies. Yes, the entire family had participated in the ritual on July 30th. And yes, she knew where they were now. But she would not tell us. Not couldn't, wouldn't. They made their choice, she said. They understood the cost and the gift. They are where they need to be, doing what needs to be done. You cannot bring them back because they haven't gone anywhere you can reach. They are between, they are both. They serve now as others have served before them. Sheriff Beaumont demanded clarification. What did between mean? Were they alive? Dead? Being held against their will? Marguerite smiled at these questions, as though they revealed our fundamental ignorance. Your words don't describe what they are now. Alive and dead. These are not the only choices. There are other states of being. The rituals open doors to these states. The Colemans walked through such a door, and now they guard it from the other side. This is a great honor. This is a sacred responsibility. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours. Dr. Hartley's notes record increasingly strange and disturbing claims from Marguerite. She explained that the rituals performed on Île Perdue served to maintain what she called the ceiling, a metaphysical barrier that prevented something from emerging from beneath the island. What was this something? Marguerite's explanation, filtered through cultural and linguistic barriers, was difficult for the investigators to fully comprehend. She spoke of old hunger, of those who came before even the first people, of entities that existed before. Human consciousness could name them, that had been trapped or contained by successive generations of spiritual practitioners. According to Marguerite, the ritual performed on July 30th was a passing of guardianship. The old practitioners were dying without successors. The island had called the Coleman family specifically because they possessed something necessary, what she termed clarity of spirit. Their participation wasn't coerced, it was a choice made with full understanding of the consequences. "Where are their bodies?" Sheriff Beaumont had asked, pressing for concrete, physical answers. "Bodies are temporary vessels," Marguerite responded. "What they are now requires no bodies. Or rather, they exist in a state where body and spirit are no longer separate. They are woven into the island itself. They are part of the ceiling now. If you could see properly, if your eyes were opened, you would see them there still, in the grove, standing eternal watch." Sheriff Beaumont, frustrated by what he perceived as deliberate mystification, threatened to arrest Marguerite for obstruction of justice, possibly as an accessory to murder. Father Broussard intervened, warning the sheriff that arresting this woman would likely cause serious unrest in the local communities. Dr. Hartley asked a different question. "If what you're saying is true, can we see evidence? Can you prove the Coleman family chose this willingly? Can you show us anything that would substantiate these claims?" Marguerite considered this carefully, then nodded. She retrieved a wooden box from beneath her bed, opened it, and withdrew several items. A letter, written in Martha Coleman's hand, dated July 28, 1902. A photograph of the entire Coleman family, taken on the island, with all 6 members smiling, and a small journal Samuel Coleman had apparently kept separately from his main journal, containing detailed observations of the ceremonies he'd witnessed. The letter, which Sheriff Beaumont seized as evidence, was later transcribed into the official record. Martha wrote, "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, then we have completed the transformation and you have come looking for us. Please understand that what we are about to do is voluntary. We were lost when we came to this island, lost in ways we didn't even recognize. We thought we sought isolation, but what we truly sought was purpose, meaning, connection to something larger than our small lives. We have found that here, Marguerite has shown us the truth about this place, about the work that must be done here. Tonight, we join that work willingly, joyfully even, knowing that our sacrifice preserves something essential. Tell our families we love them. Tell them we are not gone, merely changed. Tell them not to mourn, but to remember us as we truly were. Seekers who found what we were seeking." Martha Coleman, July 28, 1902. The authenticity of this letter would be debated for years. Handwriting experts confirmed it was written in Martha's hand, but had she written it under duress, under the influence of drugs or psychological manipulation? Or had she, as the letter claimed, made a genuine choice? Sheriff Beaumont left Marguerite's home with more questions than answers, but he also left with a growing sense that traditional legal frameworks couldn't adequately address what had happened on Île Perdue. This wasn't a conventional crime. It was something else entirely, something that challenged the very categories through which modern society understood reality. The investigation officially concluded on October 15, 1902. Sheriff Beaumont's final report, filed with the Louisiana State Police, read, "After exhaustive investigation, no evidence of foul play has been discovered. The Coleman family appears to have left their residence voluntarily, taking no possessions. Their current whereabouts remain unknown. No bodies have been recovered. No witnesses to any crime have come forward. While the circumstances surrounding their disappearance remain deeply unusual and troubling, there is insufficient evidence to charge any individual with any crime. Case suspended, pending new evidence. But unofficially, Sheriff Beaumont wrote something very different in his personal journal. I believe Martha Coleman's letter. I believe they chose this, whatever this is. I believe there are practices in these swamps that predate our laws, our understanding, our entire worldview. And I believe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved by men like me. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some knowledge carries too heavy a price. I'm closing this case not because I've found answers, but because I've found questions I'm not equipped to pursue. May God have mercy on the Coleman family wherever they are, and may God protect us from ever truly understanding what happened on that island. The official file was sealed by order of the parish court in November 1902. Local newspapers were strongly discouraged from further coverage. The story faded from public consciousness, becoming just another piece of Louisiana folklore, another ghost story told around fires, another cautionary tale about respecting the old places and the old ways. But the story didn't end there. It couldn't end there, because Île Perdue remained and people continued to visit it, and strange things continued to happen there. The Coleman case might have remained permanently sealed, forgotten by all but local historians, if not for a series of discoveries made decades later that reignited interest in the family's fate. In 1947, a team of surveyors mapping coastal Louisiana for oil exploration purposes visited Île Perdue. The lead surveyor, a man named Robert Patterson, kept detailed field notes. In an entry dated June 12, 1947, he wrote, "Surveyed the central portion of the island today. Found the old Coleman house, remarkably well preserved, considering it's been abandoned for 45 years. But the truly strange discovery came in the grove. We found 6 standing stones, not natural formations, but clearly worked stone, arranged in a circle around a central point. Each stone had a name carved into it: Samuel, Martha, Elizabeth, Thomas, Mary, James. The carving looked recent despite the stones being weathered. Our local guide, a Kitimasha man named Joseph Delcombre, refused to approach these stones. He said they weren't memorials. He said they were anchor points. When I asked what that meant, he just shook his head and said some things are better left unknown. Patterson's team photographed these stones. The photographs, discovered in the Louisiana State University archives in 1982, show 6 granite markers, roughly 4 feet tall, arranged in a perfect circle, approximately 15 feet in diameter. The names are carved in a simple, elegant script. But what's most unusual about these photographs is what appears in the background: shadowy figures, humanoid in shape, but indistinct, seeming to stand among the trees. Photography experts have analyzed these images extensively, with most concluding the figures are probably artifacts of early photography. Double exposures, light leaks, or shadows misinterpreted by the camera. But one expert, Dr. Ellen Fitzgerald of MIT, offered a different assessment in 1985. These figures appear in multiple photographs taken from different angles on different days. They occupy consistent spatial positions relative to the stones. While I cannot definitively state what they are, I can say they are not typical photographic artifacts. Something was present in that grove when these photographs were taken. Whether it was physical, spiritual, or something beyond our current understanding, I cannot say. In 1963, a graduate student named Catherine Broussard, no relation to Father Broussard, conducted oral history interviews with elderly members of the Creole and Kitimasha communities around Franklin for her thesis on Louisiana folklore. Several of her interviewees mentioned the Coleman case without prompting. One particularly detailed account came from a woman identified only as Mrs. T in the transcripts, who claimed her grandmother had known Marguerite Doucet personally. According to Mrs. T, "My grandmother said Marguerite lived to be over 100 years old, died in 1915. Before she died, she trained 3 younger women to continue the work on Île Perdue. My grandmother was one of them. She told me she went to that island every dark moon from 1912 until 1955, when she became too old to make the journey. She said the Coleman family was still there, not as ghosts exactly, but as presences. She said she could see them sometimes, standing in the grove, keeping watch. She said they looked peaceful, content even. She said they were doing important work that kept all of us safe, though we'd never know it." Catherine Broussard attempted to identify Mrs. T's grandmother through genealogical research, but was unable to do so definitively. However, she did uncover records showing that 3 women from the Franklin area, Marie Leblanc, Josephine Guidry, and Celeste Thibodeau, purchased property jointly on an unnamed coastal island in 1913. The property records match the location of Île Perdue, though the island is not identified by name in the documents. The most disturbing later discovery came in 1978, when Hurricane Agnes caused significant storm surge damage to the Louisiana coast. After the storm, a fisherman named Thomas Arsenault discovered a metal box washed up on the mainland near Franklin. Inside the water-damaged box were photographs, letters, and a journal fragment. The photographs showed the Coleman family, but not from 1902. These were Polaroid photographs, created with technology that didn't exist until the 1960s. They showed 6 people, 3 adults and 3 adolescents, standing in the familiar grove on Île Perdue. The people bore striking resemblances to the Coleman family based on the 1902 photographs, but they wore clothing from the 1960s or 70s. The journal fragment was written in English, but in a hand that experts could not definitively identify. It read, "Year unknown, date irrelevant. We exist now in cyclical time, returning to the same moments, performing the same necessities, experiencing duration without progression." Elizabeth asks if we made the right choice. I tell her what I believe, that we chose meaning over mere existence, purpose over comfort, service over selfishness. Thomas has learned to navigate the boundaries better than any of us. He can almost exist fully in both worlds simultaneously. Mary sings the old songs Marguerite taught us, and when she sings, the ceiling holds firm. Little James, not so little anymore, tends the markers and keeps the paths clear. Martha and I continue the primary work, the central maintenance. We are tired in ways that transcend physical exhaustion, but we are also more alive than we ever were. In our old life, if we could go back knowing what we know now, would we choose differently? I cannot speak for my family, but I would make the same choice. Some sacrifices are worth making, some gifts are worth accepting, regardless of their cost. Louisiana State Police investigated this discovery, ultimately concluding the materials were an elaborate hoax created by someone familiar with the Coleman case. But they could offer no explanation for certain chemical analyses performed on the photographs and papers, which suggested the materials were genuinely from different time periods, some old, some much more recent. In 1989, Dr. Marcus Webb, a professor of religious studies at Loyola University, New Orleans, received permission to conduct a sanctioned academic study of Île Perdue. His team spent 3 days on the island, documenting the site, interviewing local informants, and attempting to understand the cultural and spiritual significance of the location. Dr. Webb's published findings, released in 1991, were cautiously academic. He concluded that Île Perdue had served as a sacred site for multiple cultural groups over centuries, that syncretic religious practices combining African, Native American, and European elements had been performed there, and that the Coleman family had likely been drawn into these practices, with their ultimate fate remaining legitimately mysterious. But Dr. Webb's private notes, discovered after his death in 2003, told a different story. In unpublished journal entries, he described experiencing temporal anomalies while on the island, moments where time seemed to fold or repeat, where he saw the same bird fly past twice, where he experienced memories of events that hadn't happened yet. He described seeing figures in the grove that his cameras didn't capture, hearing voices speaking in languages he didn't understand, but somehow comprehended anyway. Most disturbingly, he wrote, "On our final night on the island, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of children singing. I left my tent and followed the sound to the grove. There in the moonlight I saw them, the Coleman family, all 6 of them standing around the central stone, hands joined, singing a song I'd never heard before, but knew was ancient beyond measure. They looked solid, real, alive." Martha Coleman turned and looked directly at me. She smiled. Then she spoke, though her lips didn't move. "Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for remembering. The work continues. The ceiling holds. Tell them we're still here, still serving, still choosing this every day." Then they faded, not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph developing in reverse until only the stones remained. Dr. Webb never returned to Île Perdue. He published his academic findings, but never spoke publicly about his private experiences. In his final journal entry about the case, written in 2002, 1 year before his death, he wrote, "Some truths can't be communicated through academic language. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only witnessed and honored. The Coleman family found something on that island that we, in our modern arrogance, have forgotten exists. A way to transcend the false choice between living and dying, between presence and absence. They found a way to exist in service to something larger than themselves. Whether that's tragedy or triumph, I'm no longer qualified to judge." The forbidden case of the Coleman family remains exactly that, forbidden in the sense that it defies our accepted categories of understanding, challenges our assumptions about reality, and resists the neat resolutions we prefer our mysteries to have. The official record states simply that 6 people disappeared from a Louisiana island in 1902 and were never found. But the unofficial record, the letters, the diaries, the testimonies, the later discoveries, suggest something far stranger and more profound. So, what truly happened to Samuel, Martha, Elizabeth, Thomas, Mary, and James? Coleman? Theory 1, the conventional explanation. The family fell victim to a religious cult operating in the Louisiana bayous. Marguerite Doucette and her associates manipulated the Colemans through psychological pressure, drugs, or spiritual coercion, ultimately leading to their deaths in some ritual ceremony. The bodies were disposed of in the swamp, where they would never be recovered. The later evidence of their continued presence was either fabricated by true believers or represents misinterpretation of natural phenomena by suggestible observers. This theory has the advantage of fitting within our modern understanding of reality. Cults exist, manipulation happens, people are murdered in ritual contexts, bodies disappear in swamps. This explanation requires no acceptance of supernatural elements, no revision of our fundamental beliefs about how the world works. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain Martha's letter, written in her own hand with no signs of duress. It doesn't explain the family's clear progression from skepticism to interest to willing participation, documented in their own writings. It doesn't explain the consistent reports of their presence on the island spanning decades. It doesn't explain the physical evidence, the stones, the photographs, the artifacts that continues to accumulate. Theory 2. The folkloric explanation. Île Perdue truly is a thin place, a location where the boundaries between worlds are permeable. The rituals, performed there for centuries, serve a genuine protective function, containing or appeasing forces that predate human civilization. The Coleman family, through circumstances we might call fate or destiny, were called to this location. They learned the truth about the island and its significance. They chose to become guardians, sacrificing their ordinary lives to take on a sacred responsibility. They exist now in a state between life and death, between physical and spiritual, maintaining the ceiling that protects the world from whatever lies beneath that island. This theory requires accepting that reality operates in ways our modern materialist worldview doesn't acknowledge. It requires believing that consciousness can exist independent of physical bodies, that spiritual practices have actual metaphysical effects, that there are powers and presences in the world that science cannot measure or explain. Many people, particularly those from the communities where these traditions are maintained, accept this explanation without reservation. For them, the Coleman case isn't mysterious at all. It's a documented example of how the old ways still function, still matter, still serve essential purposes, even in our supposedly modern world. Theory 3. The psychological explanation. The Coleman family experienced a shared delusion, possibly triggered by isolation, possibly by exposure to toxic substances in their environment, possibly by the psychological pressure of living in an unfamiliar and challenging setting. They came to believe in the reality of the rituals and the necessity of their participation. They died, possibly by suicide, possibly by accident, while engaging in what they believed were sacred practices. The later evidence represents either coincidence, hoax, or the power of suggestion affecting investigators and witnesses. This explanation preserves materialist reality while acknowledging the genuine mystery of shared belief and its power to shape behavior and perception. It treats the Coleman family with more sympathy than the cult theory, seeing them not as victims of malicious manipulation, but as casualties of their own spiritual seeking gone tragically wrong. Each theory has its defenders. Each explains some elements while struggling with others, and perhaps that's the true nature of cases like this. They exist precisely at the boundaries of our understanding, challenging us to either expand our worldview or dismiss what doesn't fit. What we know for certain is this: 6 people came to Île Perdue in 1902. 6 people vanished that same year. No bodies were ever found. No criminal prosecution ever occurred. The island remains unchanged and unchanging, still avoided by most locals, still reportedly the site of ceremonies performed by practitioners who believe such ceremonies are necessary. And sometimes, according to those who dare to visit, you can still see them there in the grove. 6 figures, standing eternal watch, keeping a promise made over a century ago, maintaining a ceiling that protects us all from truths we're perhaps fortunate not to comprehend. To this day, no one knows the truth about what happened to the Coleman family. But perhaps the truth isn't meant to be known. Perhaps some mysteries serve us better unsolved, reminding us that the world is larger, stranger, and more complex than our comfortable certainties allow. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of Louisiana's most disturbing and enduring mysteries. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to our haunted community and clicking the notification bell so you never miss our explorations of history's darkest corners. Share your theories in the comments below. Do you believe the Colemans were victims, volunteers, or something else entirely? And tell us, have you ever encountered a place that felt thin, where the boundaries seemed permeable, where something old still lingered? Until next time, remember, Some places remember what we choose to forget. Some histories refuse to stay buried. And some families, having found their purpose, never truly leave. Stay curious, stay skeptical, but stay open to possibilities beyond your current understanding. This is our haunted community, and we'll see you in the next investigation.